She stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk, and the man beside her did not look at her. Not when she spoke her vows, not when the priest pronounced them man and wife. The Duke of Dunmore kept his gaze fixed somewhere above her head, as if she were nothing but a shadow he had been forced to endure. Lily Carrington felt the cold seep through her gloves and settle deep in her chest. She had not expected love. She was not that naive. But she had hoped for something warmer than this perfect, handsome stranger who seemed carved from winter stone. When the ceremony ended, his hand barely brushed hers before he withdrew it. The guests whispered behind fans. They always whispered. Everyone knew the Carrington family had fallen into disgrace after their father's foolish investments. Everyone knew this marriage was an arrangement to save her from ruin. The Duke of Dunmore had stepped forward like a reluctant savior, and Lily had been handed to him like a piece of unsold property. She had told herself she could endure it. She had endured so much already. But when she stole a glance at his face, she saw nothing. No warmth, no curiosity, only a man fulfilling a duty he clearly resented. She swallowed the ache rising in her throat and told herself she would not cry. Not here, not in front of all these glittering strangers. 2 years earlier she had been a different woman. She had been in love. Edward Langley had been her neighbor's son, a gentleman with laughing eyes and a gentle voice. They had grown up together, and when he had knelt in her father's garden and asked her to be his wife, she had said yes without hesitation. The wedding had been planned for spring. Her dress had been ordered. And then one gray November morning Edward had vanished. No letter, no explanation. His family refused to speak of it. Rumors flew. Gambling debts, another woman, a duel gone wrong. Lily had clung to hope for months, sending letters to every address she could find, until her brother had finally taken her hands and said, very softly, "He is not coming back, Lily. You must let him go." She had not let him go. She had simply learned to carry the absence like a stone beneath her ribs. And when her father died a year later, leaving behind a mountain of debt and a name tarnished beyond repair, she had no strength left to fight. Her brother, now the reluctant head of the family, had told her about the Duke of Dunmore's offer, a marriage of convenience, a clean transaction, her reputation protected, her family saved. "He is a cold man," her brother had warned, "but he is honorable." Lily had nodded, staring at her reflection in the window. What was the point of love now? Love had already left her behind. The carriage ride to Dunmore Hall was long and silent. The Duke sat across from her, reading a newspaper with the kind of focused attention that made it very clear he had no interest in conversation. Lily pressed her hands together in her lap and watched the countryside roll past. Green hills, ancient oaks, a world that looked peaceful while her own heart felt like a clenched fist. When the great iron gates of Dunmore Hall came into view, she caught her breath despite herself. The house was magnificent. Gray stone rose against a pale sky, turrets and mullioned windows catching the afternoon light. It was the sort of place she might have dreamed of as a girl, back when dreams had felt safe. But the moment she stepped through the massive front doors, the cold wrapped around her again. Not the cold of weather, but the cold of a house that had forgotten warmth. The housekeeper, a thin woman with efficient hands, showed her to her chambers. They were beautiful. A four-poster bed draped in blue velvet, a fireplace already crackling, fresh flowers on the writing desk, and they were far away from the Duke's own rooms at the opposite end of the east wing. Lily did not need a map to understand the message. She was welcome here. She was provided for, but she was not wanted. That night she dined alone. A footman informed her that His Grace was occupied with estate matters. Lily nodded, ate 3 bites of an elaborate meal, and went to bed. The stone beneath her ribs grew heavier. Passed in careful silence. She learned the rhythms of the house. The Duke rose early and spent his days riding, meeting with stewards, attending to the business of his vast estate. He was rarely at home, and when he was, he treated her with distant politeness. "Good morning. I trust you slept well. The weather is fine today." Each sentence was perfectly formed and utterly empty. Lily tried to fill the silence. She left small notes on his desk, a sketch of the garden, a pressed flower from the conservatory. Once she arranged for his favorite meal to be served after he had mentioned, offhandedly, that he preferred simple food. He ate it without comment. She began to think of herself as a ghost, a duchess in name only, haunting rooms that did not need her. The servants were kind but guarded. The tenants in the village looked at her with curiosity rather than warmth. She had no friends here, no purpose. The loneliness was so thick she could feel it pressing against her skin when she lay awake at night. This was not the life she had wanted. This was not even the life she had grieved for. It was simply a long, gray waiting room. Then came the morning of the frost. She had risen early, unable to sleep, and wandered into the gardens. The air was sharp and clean, and every blade of grass glittered with ice. She had no gloves. She had not planned to stay outside, but the stillness calmed her. She knelt by the frozen rose beds, remembering her mother's garden, remembering a time when she had known how to laugh. She stayed there so long her hands went numb. When she finally returned to the house, shivering, a servant met her at the door with a thick woolen shawl. "His Grace asked that you be kept warm, Your Grace. He noticed you had gone out without a wrap." Lily froze. He had noticed. He had seen her leave. She clutched the shawl and felt something dangerously close to hope flicker in her chest. That evening she found a fire burning in her sitting room, even though she had not asked for one. The housekeeper said, very carefully, that the Duke had given instructions. Lily sat in front of the flames for an hour, trying to understand a man who wrapped her in warmth but refused to meet her eyes. She began to watch him more closely. The way he paused at the top of the stairs when he heard her humming in the music room. The way his gaze followed her across the dinner table on the rare nights he joined her. Once, she caught him looking at her with an expression she could not name, something raw and almost hungry, before his face smoothed back into indifference. She felt a fragile hope unfurl inside her like a new leaf. Perhaps he was not heartless. Perhaps he was only wounded, and she could be patient enough to heal him. The hope lasted 3 more weeks. It shattered on a Thursday evening in March. The Duke was hosting a dinner for several local landowners. Lily played her role perfectly. She wore a deep green gown that made her hazel eyes glow. She smiled at the right moments. She made the older wives laugh. She felt, for the first time, like she might actually belong here. The Duke even stayed close to her during the pre-dinner drinks, his hand hovering at the small of her back, a gesture so small and yet so significant she nearly wept. After the meal, the men withdrew to the library for brandy. Lily slipped away to the terrace for air, her heart buzzing with cautious joy. She was about to re-enter the house when she heard voices through the open library window. She recognized her husband's low, measured tone immediately. Lord Ashworth, a man with a loud laugh and too much confidence, was speaking. "Come now, Dunmore. You can admit it among friends. The marriage was a duty, nothing more. A pretty solution to an ugly family scandal. No one expects you to actually care for the girl." Lily stopped breathing. The Duke was silent for a long moment. She willed him to say something, anything, defend her, defend them. Then his voice came, calm and terribly empty. "My marriage is a matter of duty. I have no need of affection, nor do I seek it. The Duchess understands her position." Ashworth laughed, cold as ever. "Well, she is decorative enough. You could have done worse." Lily did not hear the rest. She turned and walked very slowly back into the ballroom. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She simply felt all the warmth drain out of her, leaving a hollow shell behind. He did not care. He would never care. She had been a fool to hope. That night she removed the shawl from the back of her chair and folded it carefully in a drawer. She stopped leaving flowers on his desk. She stopped waiting for him at dinner. When he spoke to her, she answered politely, briefly. The way one speaks to a stranger on a train. The hope inside her did not just die. It calcified into something hard and self-protective. The next morning, she went to the village alone for the first time. The village of Dunmore was small but lively. A baker, a blacksmith, a tiny bookshop that smelled of old paper. Lily wandered through it with no particular aim, simply grateful to be somewhere that did not feel like a mausoleum. She noticed the children first. There were so many of them, barefoot and grubby, watching her with wide eyes. They were the children of tenants, farmers' sons and daughters who had no school to attend. Lily stopped and spoke to a little girl who was trying to tie a knot in a piece of string. The girl's name was Bess, and she had never learned to read. Something shifted inside Lily that day, a tiny spark of purpose. Over the following weeks, she threw herself into a new project. She would open a schoolroom. She convinced the vicar to let her use an empty cottage near the church. She gathered slates and chalk and old books from the estate library, things the Duke never touched. She did not ask for his permission. She simply began. The children came hesitantly at first, then in droves. Lily discovered she was good at this. She had patience. She knew how to explain things simply. The children loved her with the fierce, uncomplicated love of the young. They brought her wildflowers and crooked drawings. They called her the Angel Duchess, which made her laugh for the first time in months. She began to sleep better. The stone in her chest became a little lighter. She spent less and less time at the great house. She left before the Duke rose and returned after he had retired for the evening. If he noticed her absence, he said nothing. But he did notice. Alexander St. Clair, Duke of Dunore, had spent 2 decades mastering the art of emotional restraint. He had learned it from his father, who had believed that feeling was weakness. He had refined it through years of political maneuvering and societal expectation. He had convinced himself that his marriage was a practical arrangement, nothing more. He had convinced himself that he did not need the warmth of another person, and for a time he had almost believed it. But the silence in his house was beginning to unnerve him. He noticed when she stopped playing the piano in the afternoons. He noticed when her note disappeared from his desk. He noticed the precise, polite way she answered his questions, as if she were addressing a distant acquaintance rather than her husband. He noticed the circles under her eyes fatting, and that made no sense to him. She should have been wilting. Instead, she seemed to be growing stronger. One afternoon, driven by an impulse he refused to name, he rode out toward the village. He told himself he was inspecting a drainage issue on the lower fields, but he stopped his horse at the edge of the churchyard, hidden by a copse of trees, and watched. Lily was outside the cottage, surrounded by children. She was laughing. Her hair had come partly loose from its pins, and there was a smudge of chalk on her cheek. She was holding hands with 2 small girls and spinning them in a circle. The sound of her laughter reached him across the grass. It was a sound he had never heard before, not directed at him. Something hot and uncomfortable twisted in his stomach. He did not want to name it. He turned his horse and rode away. The jealousy arrived in earnest a month later, in the form of a painter. Mr. Daniel Hawthorne was the youngest son of a baron, a man with paint-stained fingers and an easy smile. He had been commissioned to paint a series of landscapes of the Dunmore estate, and he had a way of appearing wherever Lily was. At first, she thought little of it. He was friendly and undemanding, and he asked her questions about the gardens she was slowly restoring behind the schoolhouse. He offered to sketch the children for her. He made her laugh. The Duke first saw them together in the rose garden. Lily was standing on a stone bench, reaching for a trailing vine, and Hawthorne was steadying her with a hand on her elbow. The gesture was perfectly proper, but the Duke's jaw tightened so hard he felt a muscle jump in his cheek. That evening, he joined her for dinner for the first time in 2 weeks. "You've been spending a great deal of time in the village," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Lily did not look up from her soup. "I have. With the painter. Mr. Hawthorne has been kind enough to help with the schoolroom decorations. The children adore him." The Duke set his spoon down with a little more force than necessary. "I trust you remember your position. The Duchess of Dunmore cannot afford to inspire gossip." Lily finally looked at him. Her gaze was steady and utterly unafraid. "I inspire nothing but education and a little gardening, Your Grace. If that troubles you, I am sorry, but I will not give up the only thing that makes me feel useful." He had no response. She returned to her soup. The silence stretched between them, thick as fog. From that day, the Duke began to watch her with a new intensity. It was not the detached observation of a man fulfilling a duty. It was the sharp, hungry attention of a man who was slowly realizing he might be losing something he had never allowed himself to value. He found reasons to be in the same room. He asked her opinion on estate matters. He brought her a new collection of botanical prints, saying only, "I thought you might like them." Lily accepted the gift with polite thanks and placed it on a side table without opening it. She had stopped hopping for crumbs. She had built a life outside of him, and she was not going to risk it for a handful of pretty gestures. The second crack in his armor came at the midsummer ball. The ball was held at a neighboring estate and attendance was not optional. Lily wore a gown of pale lavender silk, her hair arranged with fresh flowers. She looked like a woman who had finally come into her own. Several men noticed. Mr. Hawthorne noticed most of all. He asked her to dance. She accepted. The Duke watched from the edge of the ballroom, a glass of wine untouched in his hand as his wife waltzed with another man. Hawthorne's hand rested in the small of her back. He was speaking, and Lily was smiling up at him, her face open and bright. She had never smiled at the Duke that way, not once. When the dance ended, the Duke cut through the crowd with the precision of a blade. He appeared at Lily's side and said, very quietly, "I believe the next dance is mine." Lily's smile faded. She turned to him with that same polite, distant expression she had worn for months. "Of course, Your Grace." They danced in silence. His hand was firm on her waist, his steps flawless, his face carved from marble. "You are making a spectacle," he murmured. "I am dancing with my husband," she replied. "How can that be a spectacle?" "You know what I mean." She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something that looked like genuine anger in her eyes. "I do not know what you mean, because you have never told me what you want. You speak to me in duties and reputations and cold commands. You made it perfectly clear that I am nothing to you, so I have built a life in which I am something to someone else. You do not get to resent me for that." The dance ended. She stepped back, curtsied, and walked away. He stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, the words striking him like physical blows. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at the fire, replaying every moment of their marriage, her hopeful notes, her pressed flowers, the way she had once looked at him with something that might have been tenderness. He had thrown it all away because he was too afraid to feel. He had told himself she was better off without his darkness. But the truth was simpler and uglier. He was a coward. The next morning, he asked his steward a question he had never asked before. "Where is her Grace?" "At the schoolroom, Your Grace. Mr. Hawthorne is with her. He is painting a mural, I believe." The Duke's hands curled into fists. He did not ride to the village. He walked fast. When he reached the cottage, he stopped at the gate and saw them through the window. Hawthorne was on a ladder, paintbrush in hand. Lily was standing below, holding a palette, laughing at something he said. They looked easy together. They looked happy. The Duke felt something inside him splinter. He waited until Hawthorne left for the afternoon before he approached. Lily was tidying the schoolroom, her back to the door. When she turned and saw him, her expression shuddered immediately. "Your Grace, this is unexpected." He stepped inside and closed the door. The small room felt suddenly very small indeed. Lily. She blinked. He had never used her name before. Always Duchess or Madam or nothing at all. "I have been a fool," he said, his voice rough. "I have treated you as a duty when you have never been anything less than a gift I did not deserve." She stared at him, her hands stilling on the pile of slates. "What do you want, Alexander?" The sound of his own name in her mouth nearly undid him. "I want you to stop looking at him like that. I want you to come home. I want to try." Lily was quiet for a long moment, then she shook her head. "I cannot give you what you want. I gave you months of trying. I gave you notes and flowers and every scrap of hope I had. You threw it back in my face. You told your friends I was a duty. You left me alone in that great cold house until I thought I would disappear from loneliness. And now, because another man has noticed me, you suddenly want to try. That is not love. That is possession." He flinched as if she had struck him. "It is not possession. It is. I do not know how to name it. I have never known how to name it. But I know that the thought of losing you makes me feel like I am drowning." "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before you made me invisible." She picked up her shawl and walked past him, out the door, into the late afternoon sun. He stood alone in the little schoolroom, surrounded by children's drawings and the faint scent of chalk, and he understood for the first time the true weight of what he had broken. The days that followed were a strange, tense stalemate. The Duke did not stop his attentions. He sent fresh flowers to her room every morning. He ordered the garden she had been struggling to restore to be fully staffed. He appeared at the schoolhouse with a cartload of books and read a story to the children himself, his deep voice filling the room while Lily watched with an unreadable expression. The villagers began to whisper that the cold Duke had fallen in love with his own wife. Lily heard the whispers and did not know what to feel. Part of her was still angry. Part of her was terrified to hope again. But a small, stubborn part of her was beginning to notice the shadows under his eyes, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way he looked at her now as if she were the only bright thing in a dark world. Then Daniel Hawthorne proposed. He did it in the garden, in the golden hour when the light turned everything soft and hazy. He was earnest and kind, and everything a woman could want. He offered her a life filled with warmth and laughter and equal partnership. He offered to take her away from the cold Duke and the big, lonely house. Lily looked into his gentle face and felt nothing but a vast, aching sadness. "Daniel," she said softly, "you are a good man, the very best, but I am not free to accept." "He does not deserve you," Daniel said, his voice tight. "Perhaps not, but I made vows, and I am not ready to break them." She left him standing in the garden, his hand still outstretched. She did not see the Duke watching from the upstairs window, his face pale as death. That night, a visitor arrived at Dunmore Hall. Lily was in the library, staring at the same page of a book for an hour, when the butler announced, "Mr. Edward Langley has called, Your Grace." The book slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Edward Langley, the name she had whispered into her pillow for 2 years, the face she had searched for in every crowd, the ghost who had haunted her every breath. He walked into the library and he was older, yes. His hair was touched with gray at the temples and there were lines around his eyes, but he was alive. He was whole. He was here. "Lily," he said, and his voice broke. She stood, her legs trembling. "You're dead. I thought you were dead." "I am so sorry," he said. "I wanted to contact you. I wrote you a letter, but I have only just learned that you never received it." "A letter? There was no letter." Her voice was sharp, ragged. "You vanished. You left me with nothing, no explanation, no goodbye. I mourned you." Edward's face crumpled. He took a step toward her, then stopped. "I made terrible mistakes. I fell into debt. Bad men were going to hurt me, and they threatened to hurt you as well if I did not pay. I was going to flee, but then the Duke of Dunmore found me. He paid my debts, every last penny. He arranged passage for me to the colonies. He gave me a chance to start over, but he made one condition. I was never to contact you again." The room tilted. Lily gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "The Duke did this." "He saved my life," Edward said quietly. "I was a coward and a fool, and he saved me. I thought he had told you. I thought you knew. But when I wrote to him last month asking if I could finally make amends, he confessed that he never gave you the letter. He kept it from you. He thought it would be kinder for you to hate me than to know the truth and live with the pain of it." Lily could not breathe. The Duke, the man who had married her out of duty, the man who had watched her grieve and said nothing, the man who had kept her in the dark for 2 years while she died a little every day. And all along, he had been the one who had orchestrated everything. "Where is he?" she whispered. Edward hesitated. "In his study, I believe." Lily, I know this is a shock, but please understand. He was trying to protect you. In his own broken way, he was trying to protect you. She did not answer. She walked out of the library, her footsteps echoing in the marble hall. The house felt enormous and strange, as if she were seeing it for the first time. When she reached the study door, she did not knock. She pushed it open. The Duke was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned when she entered, and the expression on his face was one she had never seen before. It was not coldness. It was not indifference. It was raw, unguarded terror. "You saw him," Alexander said. His voice was hoarse. "You knew," Lily said. "You knew where he was this whole time. You knew why he left. You let me believe I was abandoned. You let me grieve while you held the truth in your hands." "Yes," he did not look away. "I did." "Why?" The word tore out of her, half sob, half fury. "Why would you do that to me?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, they were wet. "Because I loved you." She went still. "I saw you before you ever knew my name," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was the Whitmore ball 5 years ago. You were wearing a blue gown and you were laughing with your mother. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I asked someone who you were, and they told me you were already promised to Edward Langley, so I locked the feeling away. I told myself it was nothing, but I never forgot you." He took a shaky breath. "When I learned Langley was in danger, I helped him partly because it was right and partly because I could not bear the thought of you suffering if he was harmed. I told myself I would never see you again. But then your family fell into ruin and your brother came to me, desperate. He offered me the one thing I wanted most in the world, and I took it. I told myself I could protect you. I told myself I could keep you safe without ever revealing the truth. But I could not let myself love you openly because every time I looked at you, I saw the pain I had caused. I had stolen your future. I had taken the man you loved and sent him away. And then I married you under false pretenses. I did not deserve your affection. I did not deserve your forgiveness." He stopped, his chest heaving. "So I kept my distance. I hid the letter. I let you hate me instead. Hate was easier to bear than your gratitude because your gratitude would have felt like a lie." Lily was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me." "I know," his voice cracked. "I know, I have been a coward in every way that matters. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself. And now I have lost you anyway. You will go with Langley. He is a good man. He can give you the life you deserved all along." Lily stared at him. This man who had been a stranger for so long. This man who had wrapped her in warmth and then frozen her out. This man who had loved her in secret for 5 years, who had saved the life of her first love, who had carried the guilt of it all alone. He was not cold. He was broken. And beneath the brokenness, there was a heart that had been beating for her all along. She took a step toward him, then another. "Edward is married," she said quietly. "He has a wife in the colonies. He came to thank you, not to claim me." Alexander blinked, the tears finally spilling over. "I did not know." "There are many things you do not know." She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I have not loved Edward Langley for a very long time. I loved a memory, and memories cannot hold you in the dark. But this man—" She reached up and pressed her palm to his chest, over his heart. "This man has been breaking my heart and mending it in the same breath. This man has been a fool and a martyr and a stubborn, silent ghost, and I am so very tired of being alone." He caught her hand and held it against his heart, which was pounding like a wild thing. "Lily, if there is any chance, any at all, tell me what to do. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. I will tear down every wall. I will learn to speak the things I feel. I will be whatever you need." She looked up at him, this Duke who had once seemed carved from ice, now trembling in front of her like a man on the edge of a cliff. "You already are," she whispered. "You just have to let yourself believe it." He kissed her then, and it was not gentle. It was desperate and hungry and filled with 5 years of buried longing. His hands came up to frame her face as if she were made of something precious and impossibly fragile. She clung to him, her fingers twisting in his jacket, and for the first time since she had walked down that cold aisle, she felt warm. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said, the words rough and unpracticed but fiercely honest. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you. I will love you until I am dust." She smiled through her tears. "Then you had better learn to show it, Alexander St. Clair. I am not going anywhere." The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. They were something better, they were real. Alexander learned to speak, not perfectly, not all at once, but he learned. He told her about his childhood, about the cold father who had taught him that emotion was weakness. He told her about the day he had watched her from across a ballroom and felt his heart crack open. He told her about the long, sleepless nights when he had stood outside her door, wanting to knock, wanting to explain, and walking away instead. Lily listened. She learned to forgive not all at once, but in layers, like peeling back the pages of a book. She took him to the schoolroom and made him sit on the floor with the children. She taught him how to plant roses in the garden she had claimed as her own. She showed him that strength was not silence, and love was not a burden to be carried in the dark. Edward Langley returned to the colonies with his wife, leaving behind only a letter of gratitude and a sense of quiet closure. Daniel Hawthorne finished his murals and moved on to another commission, his heart bruised but his spirit undimmed. Life at Dunmore Hall slowly, carefully, bloomed into something new. One evening, as summer softened into autumn, Lily and Alexander walked through the gardens in the golden twilight. The schoolchildren had gone home. The house was quiet behind them. Alexander stopped and took her hand. "I almost lost you," he said. "I will spend every day grateful that I did not." She turned to face him, the warm light catching the silver threads in his dark hair. "You did lose me for a time, but I found my way back, and so did you." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "You saved me, Lily, not the other way around." She shook her head, smiling. "We saved each other. That is how it is supposed to work." He pulled her into his arms, and they stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had learned that love was not a single, perfect moment. It was 1,000 small choices, 1,000 small kindnesses, 1,000 small acts of courage. It was never too late to begin again. And inside Dunmore Hall, in a study where a cold duke had once stood alone, a fire now burned warm and bright. The portrait of a young woman in a blue gown, painted from memory years ago, hung above the mantel. And beside it, a new painting was slowly taking shape. A portrait of a duchess with chalk on her cheek, laughing in a garden, surrounded by children. The artist was not a famous painter. He was a duke, still learning, still trying, his hands stained with color and his heart finally completely home.